Hello and welcome back to the Heart of Truth podcast. So, today's episode is a promised follow up to last week's episode on womb siphoning. And as I mentioned, I plan to go deeper into how that womb siphoning powers up the false matrix, powers up the false grids, looking at it from a more collective matrix perspective. And as I was planning the episode, as well as the upcoming activation for the Lionsgate, the Royal Star activation that I was really feeling into, another layer of this episode came through, and I really see this connecting all the way back to the fall of the false kings. So we're going to look at the Dark Mother and the false kings of tyranny aspect of this. And I've already got inspiration for the next episode. So we're going to be going deeper. It's like we spiral deeper with each episode, elaborating on the previous themes. And yes, there's going to be other offshoots as we continue forward, but we're really going deeper into this thread because we collectively are beginning to see the roots. We're beginning to get to the seeds of a lot of these collective issues. So we're going to anchor this into the Dark Mother and the serpent energies, the Caduceus that I have touched on, alluded to in the past couple episodes. So it's this serpent coil winding around the womb of humanity, the life force creation energy, really reversing and siphoning that Kundalini life force energy that is represented by the serpents, of course. So there is inherent distortion in a lot of that narrative, but we're going to see how it winds itself, wraps itself around the financial system, the healthcare system, and more. So we see the Caduceus as an occult symbol, but connected to medicine, finance, communication. And we're going to go deeper into the original symbolism and why it's really not an appropriate symbol for our healthcare system, for a true healthcare system, if it were really healthcare. So, what happens when these streams of serpent consciousness are inverted and co opted by these false kings, by the patriarchal structures? We get a world that we see now. But what happens when they really begin to control the flow of life force and abundance? So we're going to begin to weave the threads and piece this into a broader picture and really anchor it as scarcity and debt as tools of spiritual warfare. So we have an entire system built on debt, an entire matrix and collective mentality built on scarcity. So on top of that, as I was planning this episode, I very interestingly just saw a news update that China has officially released a robotic womb, the first artificial womb. So there is a literal pregnancy robot that is going to be unveiled in 2026 for the cost of $13,900 roughly to grow a human baby inside a literal artificial womb. We've heard whisperings of this for the last couple years that artificial wombs are in the works, and it's not myth, it's not conspiracy, it's literally here. And that's terrifying. And that to me just really puts a nail. What's the expression for that? It really puts the cherry on top for all of these narratives that we have been examining and looking at, talking about AI not being your guru, all the artificial intelligence taking over humanity's consciousness, and now they're literally taking over human form to birth life. That to me is incredibly sinister. So we're going to go deeper here first. And I don't know, I probably won't go off on a whole tangent into the artificial wombs, but just to highlight, because that could be an entire episode unto itself, but just to highlight that this reality, this dystopian future is actually here. It's happening right now. You will own nothing and be happy. We have all the houses being bought up by BlackRock and turned into rental income that will be siphoned into the corporate matrix. Nobody's going to own anything. You will own nothing and be happy. A forced happiness that is not truly rooted in freedom and sovereignty. And so there will not be any happiness for humanity going forward if these tentacles are allowed to extend any further, if the snake is allowed to coil itself around humanity's life force even further. So, looking now at the Caduceus. So, the occult operates through symbols, right? So it's helpful a lot of the time to really understand the symbolism in our world. They use numbers, they use symbols, they use dates, and yes, they use astrology and these portal dates. So when you understand the true origins of the Caduceus, you see how completely upside down, backwards, and inverted it really is that they used this symbol for our quote unquote healthcare system, for our medical system. So the Caduceus is that symbol of the two serpents wrapped around the rod, and it often has the wings at the top, right? So some people will say it's the symbol of enlightenment, the union of polarity of the two different snakes, the Ida in the Pingala, the masculine and the feminine energies, winding up the spine, activating each chakra, and meeting in the head at the pineal and pituitary to activate that enlightened consciousness, which would be represented by the wings. However, that was not truly a healing symbol originally. The true original symbol of healing was the rod of Asclepius. So there was one serpent and no wings. So it represented the Kundalini rising up the spine. The Caduceus, on the other hand, was the staff of Hermes or Mercury, the god of commerce, trade, communication, and yes, trickery. So this god was identified with thieves, merchants, messengers, and Mercury himself was said to be the patron of thieves and outlaws. So this is not really the desirable protector of physicians that we were led to believe it was. So when we look at it from this perspective, Hermes, otherwise known as Mercury, Hermes as a psychopomp guiding souls between worlds. A psychopomp is a creature spirit entity that guides souls to the afterlife. So when we look at that role specifically, could that role be linked to soul harvesting, false reincarnation cycles? So, there's a potentiality to just consider. So, why was Hermes, Mercury, the god associated with our medical industry? So it's truly a symbol of commerce and trade and potentially even soul harvesting. That's dark when we look at it from that perspective. That is not at all the symbol of healing that we were led to believe it was. So the use of the Caduceus in medicine is already a symbolic distortion, a symbol of distortion itself. It is commercial, not healing in essence. So, looking at this more deeply, Hermes Mercury governs trade, currency, communication. So, it really governs money, commerce, barter, exchange, foundational to the financial system, actually, not the medical system. But as we know, the medical system itself has become rooted in financial incentives. So here we see that this potentially was intentionally created to be like this, right? So the Hermes as an archetype became aligned with banking and trade through alchemical and hermetic traditions, not medicine, banking and trade. So some occult systems will link him to thieves, deception, as I said before, and manipulation specifically of value systems. So again, is this the the representation of healing that we would want associated with the medical industry, associated with the healing healthcare industry? It shouldn't even be an industry if we're to be really precise with our words. So Then looking at the financial matrix itself, the Federal Reserve, the IRS, they can be seen as kind of priesthoods of the false kings if we really want to get esoteric and occult about it. So they're temples of debt and tax as modern sacrifice, right? So we are sacrificing our lives, our life force, our energy, our time to pay taxes, to really prop up this system. When you look at how the Federal Reserve works, and they really don't actually have any reserves on hand, when you look at how it works, there's a beautiful series on YouTube that if I can find it, I will link it below that, and it's not new, it's gotten many views, but it really explains very succinctly and clearly and simply how the Federal Reserve works. And when you see how it really works and how our banking industry works, you see that it is truly a system of siphoning. And this is not benefiting humanity. It's only benefiting those at the top, those behind the system, those who created the system, the parasites, the vampires, the leeches, the creatures who are running the serpentine energy through the systems, who are siphoning off of humanity. So then you look at currency. So there's currents of energy, right? In currency, they use a lot of maritime language connected to the financial industry, right? So currency as currents of energy. So it's that flow of life force energy that gets hijacked. And so this connects again back to the Caduceus, back to the serpentine energy. So that flow gets siphoned and hijacked. So it, instead of going up, flowing up and expanding, it gets pulled down. So it's like a reversal current placed on humanity, where our life force energy is drained, where everybody's constantly tired, where everybody is running in the rat race and never really getting ahead. And so this is the system at its whole. And so some people can kind of break free and they serve as examples of the American dream working. So people continue to believe that this is going to potentially work for them if they just work harder. We were sold this American dream back when college wasn't as expensive, when houses were actually attainable. But over the decades and generations, things have snowballed to a point where we're seeing not just the cracks in the system, but the fundamental distortion that was inserted into the foundation. And we're seeing that it was really never truly meant to work in the first place. So, looking again at the caduceus as a symbol of as above, so below, it's been corrupted to serve a hierarchy, a false as above, false gods of tyranny, false kings of tyranny. So scarcity and debt have now been used as tools of spiritual warfare because it is one of the easiest ways to keep people out of their power is to control their financial reality and to destabilize them financially, to keep them in the handcuffs, to keep them enslaved to the system of debt, the enslavement system of debt, the debt system of enslavement. And we can see very, very clearly how many people are completely constricted because of their financial reality. Their freedom is constricted. Their emotional well-being is constricted. People are feeling burdened, physically burdened, emotionally burdened, spiritually burdened by the financial matrix, by our financial reality. We are being kept in survival mode. And being in survival mode keeps you out of a state of expansion and therefore disconnected from your spiritual essence, from your soul. It's much harder to navigate this journey when you don't have resources, when you don't have stability, when you don't have support. I know this very well myself. And this is one of the primary ways they target not just quote unquote light workers, healers, empaths, so on and so forth, but truly all of humanity. You look beyond the Western world that, is ostensibly well off. There are still plenty of people, by the way, living a relatively third world existence in America. But then you look at the rest of the world, and the majority of humanity is still living in relative poverty, if not absolute poverty. And then we have a very select few living completely ostentatious, lavish lifestyles and using their money for ill. And I'll name Bezos and Gates as two primary examples of that. So they are the visible representations of this false matrix. There are the shadows behind the scenes who are really the ones pulling the puppet strings, but those two in particular, to me, really symbolize the epitome of the distortion of the control system. So, a debt-based system is essentially energetic siphoning. And what we were talking about last week was the siphoning of the wombs. So, it is our life force energy that is propping up the false matrix itself. So, it's really a diabolical system, truly. And we can go deeper into how birth certificates kind of constitute the commodification of the human soul and the womb, how the womb is the original alchemical chamber of creation and it has been inverted into systems of birth control, taxation, artificial reproduction. We're literally seeing that now. How the serpentine energy has been inverted from wisdom and regeneration to control and consumption. That symbol of transformation has been hijacked and it in itself used to siphon and control and restrict and constrict. So alchemy, hermetics, all of these esoteric teachings and wisdom have been fully co-opted by the elite for their systems of manipulation and control. So when we begin to understand how the occult, how the darkness, how the shadowy entities operate, then we can begin to revoke consent and to actually legitimately dismantle the systems by dismantling the control structures within. So why do I talk about this stuff? Ultimately, for the purpose of liberation and reclamation of our power, one by one, us doing this work helps to relinquish the control that they have over the collective, because we will have a ripple effect. And the more of us that do this work, we're going to assist others in doing that work. And yes, it truly does have a ripple effect. And they have one less tether to anchor in to humanity as a whole. And so this is what I'm teaching people in the Defense Against the Dark Arts. And in the activation that's come through for Friday, it's the Heart of Christ Royal Star Leadership activation as it's been coming through. All of the inspiration fully dropped in today, and it's really incredibly stunning. But what we'll be doing is also dismantling these false power structures within. So I'll share details about that at the end and below in the description if that resonates with you. And whenever you come across this episode, the recordings are always available. So, getting now into the serpent symbolism in finance and power systems. So, serpents represent, again, the Kundalini life force energy, but broadly speaking, it's the control of life force, especially when it's inverted, co-opted. Again, that reversal current that I mentioned before. So let's think about it in the world right now. Looking at logos and symbolism, we have the World Health Organization itself using the Caduceus or the serpent staff. So right there, we see it imprinted on one of the biggest control mechanisms in the world. And then we have pharma companies, insurance companies, and Wall Street even filled with serpent-coded imagery. And some will say, and not everybody agrees, but some will say that the dollar sign itself has been compared to a serpent on a staff. So this is again debated, but there is some very clear visual resonance. And sometimes it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. So take that one as you will. But it's interesting. Once you begin to pay attention to these things, you'll start to see them more and more. And sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's actually right there in your face. And you're like, oh my gosh, hidden in plain sight our whole entire lives. It's right there. So then looking at the IRS taxation and connecting it with this serpent energy again. So the IRS itself, as well as just modern taxation systems in general, are part of this energy harvesting grid, siphoning life force via money, which is exchanged for our life force energy in the form of work, right? So we get paid to work. It's an exchange, but then they take a huge chunk of that pay to fund the IRS, to fund the tax system. And then what happens to those tax dollars? Well, we don't really have a say in what happens to those tax dollars. And this is why so many in America, especially, but so many worldwide are getting fed up with their governments, with their leadership, because it is false leadership that is really not putting the people first. And we won't get into politics right now, but it is a house of cards that is ripe for collapse. It should collapse. It should be dismantled because it is fully swampland out there. And nothing is really being done about it. And so we have to stop consenting in some way, shape, or form. So, looking at the way the financial system works, that they are paid through our taxes and that they're not responsibly using that money, we should be angry about that because it is our life force energy that is being siphoned to prop up their reversal systems, their lavish lifestyles that are not for the betterment of humanity as a whole. And what it's meant to be is public service, but it's become politics. And the politicians are self-serving. And so it's service to self versus service to other. And the foundation of public service is, of course, service to others. So again, there we have a fundamental reversal in place. So a lot of whistleblowers and researchers see these systems, like the taxation and IRS, as tied to ritual harvesting structures, even feeding a larger beast or AI-like grid. And I will say that that's something that I saw doing the grid work that I was doing is literal servers being propped up, being fed by womb siphons. So it's really quite dark and sinister when you begin to look at the inner workings on a more esoteric level as well, but keeping it 3D, keeping it matrix level, our life force that is, given in exchange for money is propping up this system. So they use debt, inflation, and taxation as binding spells, you can look at it as. So these legalese contracts that extract energetic compliance and sovereignty from us. And a lot of the time, the fine print screws people over, and nobody has time for the fine print. Nobody actually reads the fine print. Same thing with medical consent. People are not, there was no consent with a certain job that was doled out a few years ago. And that in itself is deeply sinister. So we have to really take a step back and get honest with ourselves about how we are consenting to these enslavement matrices so that we can revoke our consent, pull our energy back, and literally, like on an energetic level, pull our energy back so we're not being harvested from any longer. And then that system begins to slowly but surely collapse and become dismantled energetically because we're no longer feeding it. So, looking at the Vatican, so getting into even the religious layer now, but connecting it to the serpents and the financial control. So, I mean, a lot of people are familiar with the fact that the Vatican, that modern building, that room, looks like a serpent's head. It's so dark and it's so in your face obvious that once you see it, you can't unsee it. But it also sits atop one of the wealthiest banking systems on earth. So that's interesting. But we also know that the wealthiest landowner is the church and how, they relied on tithing and such, right? So the Vatican Audience Hall, that's what it is. It's that room. The audience hall is shaped like a serpent's head, complete with the eyes and the fangs, even when you look at it from the right angle, but really just straight head on. So the Vatican controls many trusts, birth certificate bonds, and it plays a massive role in the global financial matrix. And this includes canon law, admiralty law, and ecclesiastical courts. So these are legal financial systems that essentially siphon souls, like literally your legal strawman identity, through distortion. And and it's, done through the lens of religion in the case of the Vatican. So this is really getting into spiritual consequences as well. So we can see how it's not just a snake, it's like this tentacle like being. It's like this jellyfish being. I just see tentacles and I don't know, what animal it's meant to be attached to. It's this false AI type energy. You can look at it as a spider perhaps, but it's like this kind of serpentine tentacle like energy that's really disgusting, that has its little tentacles in each and every soul alive on the planet now. That's how I see it kind of visually, energetically. And it's really gross. And I've seen this in session. I've seen this in I working on the grids. Like this was something that I had to remove. And it was really, really gnarly, like super gnarly. And it's very much a parasitic energy, a parasitic entity that has its tentacles once again inside the life force energy, sucking it, draining it. So this then ties into the false kings and the fallen thrones, right? So we have the archetype of the false kings, which I got into in a previous episode, but they're ruling from illusion and distortion, this inverted template of power over and control over. And that is not the true divine authority that is meant to carry the role of kingship. So, connecting it back now to the lion and the Christ archetype, as we are still in the Lionsgate energy or entering into, depending on which perspective you're looking at it through. So, Yeshua as the Lion of Judah, the true king whose sovereignty comes from God, not from gold. Not from gold or this fiat currency. So when we look at it from this lens, the financial controllers of our world have this layer of kingship, of rulership, of authority that comes through gold and fiat currency, the false kings of tyranny siphoning off of humanity rather than divine authority given by God. So when we look at this in contrast, false kings rule through scarcity and exploitation, whereas true Grail kings who carry the frequency of the Christ rule through abundant sovereignty, service to the whole. So it's that service to other, public service orientation that they're ruling from, that they're leading from. I shouldn't even say ruling necessarily, that they're leading from. You will do greater things than me. A true Grail king carrying that Christ frequency will empower their followers, their community, let's say, to step up and to become as they are, right? To reclaim their own power. So, getting back to the financial system, the financial matrix, it's really the way that I see it is this serpent matrix that coils around the womb of humanity, controlling creation capacity through debt, through contracts, and scarcity coding. So, this survival mentality, poverty consciousness is another program that has been placed on humanity largely through religion. So, we can see how religion, financial, and medical systems have really all operated to keep humanity suppressed and enslaved. So there is this false abundance system that replaces essentially organic life force energy that keeps us severed not just from God, but from our true creation potential, from our true abundance coding. So our organic life force energy flow is exchanged with synthetic inverted energy. So currency is then cycled or siphoned out from us. So we can see again that reversal current coming into play through the siphoning. So that high frequency being sucked into the lower frequency. So what we are being called to do is essentially clear the coils, to revoke consent and to dismantle the false leadership inside and outside of us, to dismantle the internal structures that are consenting subconsciously or, from a past life, from ancestral lineage or what have you, that are subconsciously consenting to this matrix of control. And then we also have kind of in the spiritual side of things, this Luciferic bypass perpetuated by false light that, kind of perpetuate this savior programming as well as another serpent coil, kind of keeping us disempowered, disconnected from these deeper truths that want to bypass that this is a reality, that also just want to keep people hooked into their teachings, giving them their money. So they are also creating a harvesting system, those who perpetuate these teachings as well, that keep people disempowered and not truly in their sovereignty. So, this is essentially now an invitation to claim your inner throne, to claim your crown, to reclaim your Christed heart codes. So, this is where we access our Christed sovereignty, our leadership codes, is by relinquishing agreements and contracts to these external systems of control and taking our power back within. So, again, Yeshua is often called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. This is not about the Bible. I connect with Yeshua, Christ, as beyond religion, which is a man-made structure as well, same as God. But there are a lot of deep truths contained within the teachings, but take this as you will, right? So Judah was one of the 12 tribes of Israel, right? And the Messiah was prophesied to come from this lineage. So the Christ and the lion are very intimately linked. The lion represents royalty, sovereignty, messianic kingship. And the lion in scripture symbolizes courage, protection, as well as divine authority that are embodied in Christ's mission. These qualities are embodied in his mission. And so, scripture or not, this is the purest form of the lion representing the solar logos, and Christ as the alchemical heart fire. So, the lion can also be seen as a counter symbol to the predatory false lion. I kind of think of the Lion King here as far as Simba versus Scar, Simba and Mufasa versus Scar. So the false lion being that beast, devourer archetype. And Satan is described as a lion seeking to devour. So that's really interesting, right? Seeing seeing the lion in its shadow form as well as its Christed light form. So Christ as the true lion will overcome the counterfeit. So the call for us all right now is to really allow that Christ frequency to embody within our being, to emanate from our heart space, to allow it to dissolve all the false structures, to give our life to this frequency of being and to God, and to say, how do you want me to show up today? Not from a religious perspective, but from a frequency of pure devotion to being your highest self, to serve humanity in your highest capacity. Because this is what we need more of. If we're going to see tangible changes in the world for the better, it's really incumbent upon each and every one of us stepping forward to dismantle the false systems within and to allow our full selves to step forward as a true beacon of light, as a frequency holder, as a pillar of light. So, if this calls to you and you do want to go deeper, I do have this upcoming activation on Friday, 8/22, and it's the Heart of Christ Royal Star activation that came through as an inspiration in the beginning of July, and just today the full process really anchored in. The visual came through and I was like, oh my gosh, that is stunning. So as usual, I am so excited to bring these through. And this one will go deeper into a clearing of the false systems and structures that we hold internally, a dismantling of the false power systems where we're giving our energy away, a special focus on the solar plexus and heart chakras in particular. And I feel the root chakra is going to come through as well. I mean, probably there's going to be an overall chakra clearing because the womb is very connected to this as well, but I feel the heart and solar plexus the most here. So if this calls to you, the link will be in the description. You can do it as a one-off or part of the inner temple, which will also, if you do the inner temple, grant you access automatically to the Defense Against the Dark Arts masterclass series, which has become a mini course already. We did class 1. It's not too late to join. Everything is recorded and there are additional lessons expanding on certain of the subjects. So it's really laid out in a very clear format for you to integrate the information. And there's 4 pre-recorded clearings as well as the one we did on call 1. And then we have call 2 coming up on 9/9. So there's a lot in there. And then in the inner temple, there is so much more content and wisdom and tools and practices for you to really anchor into and integrate. And then on average, monthly activations like this one. So if you feel the call to join, it's very accessible and you can do everything as a one-off if you prefer that as well. So thank you so much for being here. If this resonates, we're going to go deeper next week with some of the womb coding as well, looking at it from an even deeper esoteric lens, looking into the idea of starfire. So I'm excited to get into that because there's a lot of distortion with that. I believe that'll be next week's unless something changes between now and then, if an interview comes up between now and then, but that is definitely on the docket. So stay tuned. I so appreciate all the likes, subscribes, comments, shares. If this resonates and you feel somebody else may resonate, or you just feel the general public might want to hear it. And yes, all the subscribes, the follows, it really helps my podcasts be seen by others. So you doing that really helps to support me, and engaging with any of my offerings, including my one-on-ones, helps to support me doing this work as well, doing the podcast as well. So if you feel called to go deeper into one-on-ones, I do have one-on-one womb healings as well as soul blueprint activations and deeper energy body clearings that are not necessarily focused on the womb. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, Amanda@illuminawisdom.com. I will have everything linked in the description below. Onward and upward in love and light as we journey home to the heart of truth. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you for tuning in to the Heart of Truth podcast with your host, Amanda Erin Kelly. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating or review on your favorite platform. And if you'd like to go deeper, grab your copy of my book, Let There Be Light, and join us inside the free community in Illumina Wisdom School, where you can access free resources to jumpstart your journey, such as a higher self activation and the Body Temple Blueprint Masterclass, as well as explore the plethora of resources, including Awakening Fundamentals and Luminary, my signature path to wholeness and mastery, to help you become your own healer and sovereign authority. You can access everything at thisartcalledlife.com or find the links down in the show notes below. Until next time, onward and upward in love and light as we journey home to the heart of truth.